sorry about that. Back. Right thing. Check. Test. Here we go. Good. Chat. Hello. Capture. There it is. Okay. A little bit better. Okay. Sorry. I had some technical difficulties, which was in the wrong mode. Alright, I apologize. But anyway, the long drawn out explanation. Only created small solar system. Doesn't obey the regular laws of physics. Yes, that's why. Shortbeard, hey, or sorry, it's Rev. But yeah, the big thing is that the worlds are, because, and I accidentally started a odd email chain. I was living in Houston when I started working on this. I emailed astrophysics department because I wanted to know if there was any way that a very tight small group of planets would be locked into orbit around brown stars inside of a cloud giant, and they thought that was very interesting. But they didn't really know, so they basically reached out to Austin, and they liked the question too. They began discussing it, and then it kept on going, and so eventually I got to Berkeley and the Caltech, their physics departments, and they all began an email chain. I was in it, just this regular guy who just asked one simple question, and the basic consensus was it could never happen. And that's because by the laws of physics, gravity is not, gravity can only overcome so much. And one of the things gravity will have a very hard time overcoming is something that cuts down on the inertia of the bodies that are in motion. And since the gas giant is full of stuff, whether it be meteor, it be actual like planetoids, whatever, because the gas giant is full of stuff, then it basically makes it almost impossible for the gas giant to have that ability, have planets orbiting around the brown star, because the debris, even dust particles, slows down bodies, and those bodies will grow and accumulate because they are moving through this particle cloud too. And so eventually the masses of the planetoid would fall into brown dwarfs because they'd slow down too much. So that's where we had to use. So then one of them remembered that we were doing all this arguing about a fantasy world, and they got very upset because they were like, "This is for a fantasy game," and I was like, "Yes." Like, why don't you? And it said it's got magic in it, and they're like, "Yes," and they're like, "Why don't you just say it's freaking magic?" And I was like, I could do that. I kind of wanted to have some kind of explanation. Like, no, you can explain it, but you don't have to stay within the laws of science because you have magic. And they said, remember, planets don't orbit 360 degrees around suns. They orbit in a flat plane. They're there's exceptions. For the most part, all planets orbit flat planes, round bodies. And he says, so looking at a very small, tight area to be within the area around a brown star that can have life live on these planets. And he said, you can't do a flat plane orbit. You could have one planet. I just want to have a single orbit. You have to do 360-degree orbit. So my world, my universe is breaking a billion. Anyway, it comes down around to the fact that I had lots of time, but not a lot of information. So what I came up with was, of course, Miss Mother sustains the orbits of the planets, and because she needs enough room to sustain other people, she made as many planets as she could out of the mass she managed to collect. Now, it was not a neat process. She began putting these worlds together. Some of them held, some of them worked. She had to learn a lot, and in the creation process, there was a lot of debris left. She managed to make 6 planets in total. They're all roughly in the same size. When it comes to the actual sizes of the planets, making the masses all kind of equal helter. So all the planets are about the same size, but the planets are in a 360-degree orbit that is designed to have all of them pass around the brown dwarfs, staying in a habitable zone, and having enough energy coming from the brown dwarfs to sustain life, the same plant life, and everything else. Excuse me. Now, the one thing that she did not provide for was these planets did not have enough density and mass to atmospheres. So she took all the noble gases that are required for life, and that were in herself, and she formed them in a dense cloud around 6 planets. This had 2 effects. Planets did not have to have atmospheres because she would condense oxygen-rich atmospheres required for life around those planets. And even between the planets, because the planets had to group so closely together, there would be more than enough that if you're traveling between the planets, it should be relatively, not safe, but relatively easy for things to move between the planets. And this comes down to the flora and fauna later. She basically had these things set up, and like I said, she unleashed the people in the worlds. And that's where the plan fell apart, because humanoid entities are known to be capricious, and they didn't like the idea of the fact that the Mist Mother had kidnapped them from their own worlds, taken them from their own lives, and so they basically rebelled. They went and they did not stick with the plan, and they threw a monkey wrench in everything. So she basically went through and wiped all their minds of all their memories of their past lives. Now, these people were of all ages. There were elves involved. Elves are timeless. There's other timeless races, mortals, the like. And these planets were not huge. Not huge. They're not old. They're not ancient. So she did some things to try and confuse. She put ancient ruins buried on the planet's place. She put other things on the planets that made them seem to be older. She made deals with entities to not reveal the facts about her in order for them to be able to set up shop. So she basically was making this happen for her because she wanted to have these people that she could look over, watch over, and feel like she was a part of their. She let them know who she was. She was like the old Forgotten Realms gods. She would walk the earth. And as they kind of went through this entire process. Several thousand years passed, about I think 3,000 years passed, and no. Sorry, I apologize. Only 1,000. 1,000 years passed. Several generations in human lives, or hundreds of generations, and there was a lot of lore that was secretly passed down, especially from the elves, and there was another kind of rebellion. It was more of an escape attempt. A family of dwarves who had ties to the oldest elven families were also partial to the lore that they thought that they figured out that they did not belong to this world, and that they knew that they could go somewhere else. At this point, there was the ability to travel between planets with skyships, which is where the whole situation comes along with the concept of treasure planet. And this dwarven family worked tirelessly to develop a ship that could leave the confines of the Mist Mother. And their intent was to try and find their homes. An absolute impossibility, but either way. They needed a power source that was beyond what they had. And the power sources they had were derived from a side effect of the Mist Mother spending all of her energy. And that was she imbued worlds with a large portion of her own energy. And that manifested in the formation of special geological events that were crystals energy. The crystals could be huge, they could be small. They're all varied qualities. But it was very quickly discovered that if they took the crystals and they faceted them in certain ways, gem faceting, that they could do things like channel the power or focus other power into them. And there's lots of colors of crystals. The colors of crystals determine what type of energy source what type of energy utilization they can be used for. There's force crystals, which are usually red, and the force crystals literally just generate kinetic force, but they generate it from the crystal outward. So just a raw crystal is just emanating kinetic force, and so it basically it's most interesting mining those, because when you encounter them, you can get really hurt. Because if you're like, let's say, old school pick mining, and you hit one, it's going to reflect that off of it because it's just radiating force out, and it radiates force equal to force comes in. So yeah, it blows up. But that is this one type of crystal, and they learned to facet those for two different purposes. One, they could use them for propulsion. More rudimentary gems and larger gems that couldn't be faceted safely, dangerous. They could leave them fairly rough and just facet them to channel points, and then they could have thrusters that could push, and all they had to do was pump in energy from some the energy that made the crystals, and that is the actual Mist Mother itself, the gas cloud. These crystals all the crystals can absorb energy to a point, but there is a type of crystal that its really only power is absorbing energy. They're incredibly efficient at absorbing energy, and they discovered that if they utilized nets, they're basically lined with copper, that they could draw in the Mist Mother's energy from the air, or from the mists, and bring it into these other crystals. I made them purple, and into these purple crystals, and store it there. And then they could use other crystals to draw the energy out, and put it through more cabling, and channel it to different things. Like they could channel it to the thrusters, and then they could draw more or less energy as was needed to power the ship. What the dwarves did is they realized that they had to have more power than they had ever had before in order to power these ships. And what they ended up doing was they ended up breaking via the utilization of trying to facet huge crystals into enough complicated enough gemstones that it would allow them to get that much force out of it. They ended up literally destroying this gigantic gemstone they're trying to work with, which had enough energy of the Mist Mothers imbued into it at this point that it kind of ripped a hole in her when it detonated. It also blew up an entire moon, and sorry, my cat, and may or may not have knocked a planet out of its orbital ellipse. It's also thought that the Mist Mother also slapped the planet out of the orbital ellipse, and she actually stopped it right before it went out and went beyond anything habitable. But she never put it back. Oh, hey, Radio Free Will, thank you for the hydrate. So, it became a frozen planet, and it was bad. But anyway, so the way I broke down the Mist Mother is I kind of made her the focus of a lot of the worlds themselves. As you'll see here, this is all the lore that I've written about the Mist Mother alone. I don't think it's that much, but this is just a general. This is my version of an outline. I can't do outlines and stuff at it. This is my version of an outline, and it basically I basically used it to show where the Mist Mother sat, what she was, where she was in her current iteration, and give them a basic, I guess, synopsis of what was going to be, what they could expect from her as controller and ruler. If you play in Kingdoms of Mist, you can play as just about anything, from a human, you can play someone from Earth who got dragged there. You don't have any memories of what you were, and it'll be interesting how you explain whatever skills you have in a fantasy setting. I mean, that'd be kind of cool, actually. But but you can basically bring in anyone, any gods, anything like that. And we have this. You can do everything set up to basically play any type of character you want, but you don't have tech. If you come from a future world, you're not going to bring your tech. You're not going to bring your knowledge of your tech, because that doesn't fit in with the world that this mother has out to. So that's the biggest thing. You're not going to. It wouldn't be advisable that we're playing high fantasy. And so the first world that I made up is called Elatris. Elatris is a very large world, probably the largest planet compared to the others. And Elatris is also known as the breadbasket of the world. Elatris has several nations in it, but the Elatran people are pretty much you're unified under a central government, the council. And they have a lot of trade, both on their planet and with other planets. But because they are so heavily based in trade with other planets, the Latrans also have something else that no other planet except for a planet called Kyrell really had in force, or has in force, and that is the Latrans have a large military, but specifically a navy and marine. And the Elatrans, in the last 75 years, have begun expanding. No, 175 years. They've begun expanding and sending out their ships further and further abroad. Inside this whole entire gas giant little ecosystem, there is a lot of very small, not very small, there's a lot of smaller planetoids, asteroids, giant unfinished planets that never really made it, and they are all in this orbit. They're kept from, some of them still crash into each other because they're not as well seen as the others, but that's rare. And so that orbit, when that orbit is happening, they basically have atmospheres around them to breathe. One thing they don't have is they don't have any density. They don't spin, and they don't have density for gravity. So you're kind of floating. You can use magic to create these events, and there are crystals that can be used to create these events to basically help instill that. And and the problem with these worlds is there are areas, because she just brought in all the noble gases, there are areas that are toxic, poison clouds, areas with no oxygen whatsoever. You might fly through a nitrogen-rich zone and freeze almost immediately. It's pretty much the type of situation where it's not guaranteed to be safe all the time. So one of the things that the ships have is they can generate a basic bubble around them that keeps their atmosphere in. And so by doing that, they can keep themselves in a breathable, safe situation. But if you go too far out, right back out, and you're subject to whatever's happening on the outside. The other thing that those shields do is they can give them some protection from other weapon systems, from other vehicles, pirate ships, their own ship, etc., etc. These crystals are not all these crystals are not uncommon. It's just that the more refined the crystal, smaller the crystal, the more difficult it is to one of the best things about gemstones is that they're usually very, very hard, and it makes faceting them it's still an art, but it still makes faceting of a process that can be done by hand. The crystals that I'm aware of that from the Mist Mother are not nearly as hard, and they are very easy to fracture if they are improperly worked. Well, they're still stone, but they're basically much easier to break in the faceting process. So the faceting for them is very much a skilled art form, and the gnomish people are the ones who kind of led the way on faceting. They pretty much are the best gems makers, and they pretty much have not cornered the market. They have pretty much surpassed everyone else in their ability to facility. And incidentally, they were also the ones who developed the first sky ships. They and the goblins. The goblin sky ships were at best crude and slightly chaotic. Not slightly, they're amazingly chaotic. But the whole thing with the actual situation is that all these races began exploring the areas between worlds. Now, the worlds weren't like, this world's all the elves, this world's all the... They're interspaced. But there were concentrations, like if she would find planet or civilization that was most dwarven, and she found a bunch of people who were, as she said, on the outside of society, then there would be a lot of people from that, and she would basically put these groups of people who are already together when and there are planets that were more heavily influenced than another. The Elatris is one of the more diverse planets. There are, I do believe, 6 separate nations on Elatris. The Kingdom of Evertrees, the nomadic nation of the People of Motion. There is also the People of the Grey. And there is Great Northern Range. And there is trying to remember them all because it's been a while since we. And there's one last one. People of the Grey don't know this. Great Northern Range. There's one I'm missing. I can't remember right now. I'll remember it a bit. But the People of Motion were the first ones who began to build up the trade, and they did it on their own planet. The People of Motion were originally tribespeople Trapped people. They're originally mobile nomadic, and they lived on the plains in Elatris, which is a huge area, which is verdant growth. As you go further north in Elatris, it turns into mountainous ranges. There is no pole per se with cold. The temperature is fairly moderate across the planet because the planets are so small and the energy comes across them so well. They don't have temperate issues that they do with like other planets do larger size. Because the reason that the larger planets have cold north and south poles is because not as much sun's solar radiation hits them. And so the overall ambient temperature. That's why we're having problems now, because of anyway. Elatris is a breadbasket. It has largest areas of raising actual stuffs. They have some of the largest forested areas. They have decent mineral compositions and mines, and they also have the newest people who brought into the. That's the people of the Gray, and the people of the Gray are pretty much they're the Warforged, and she brought a lot of Warforged over just because they were Warforged. If you know anything about a Warforged history, Warforged are created, and they are, except for each other, they're universally usually treated as something else. They have plenty of people who get to know them and accept them, but just as many can't accept the fact that this mechanical thing is alive. So they came over as a large mass of people, and so she put them all on Elatris, and she literally gave them a section of the and told the council they are now members of the council. Their area, I've given it to them. You respect them in all ways, or me. So that's been the latest development, and I might change it down to 4 nations. Oh no, there's two other nations. There is a nation of island people that I haven't done yet, and there is an undersea nation, because Elatris is the only planet with oceans, giant oceans. The literal southern hemisphere is almost nothing but oceans, except for on the southern polar region there is a lot of islands, mini continents, islands like that, and there is another group of people who live there. But because Elatris is kind of militant, I kind of based them roughly off of the Chinese dynasties and the Roman Empire, where there is a lot of, like, the Romans, I took the idea of the Senate and put it in the place, made it the council. I took the idea of service, giving you citizenship from the Romans, and I took the idea of concepts of service to the emperor from the Chinese dynasties, and I didn't take any of the architecture. That's not part of it. It just kind of the aspects of the civilization, and put that all into Elatris. And basically, that's how the council rules. That's the council's. There is a senior council member and everything like that, but he's separate. So from Elatris, we have one of the more unique things that I set up, and that's a place called the Dark Twins. Dark Twins are 2 planets. They are pretty much 2 planets that orbit each other much as the twin suns do. But because they house intelligent races, the Mist Mother keeps them keeps them stable. She basically makes sure they do not collide into each other. And the planets themselves are not intelligent entities. Bodies of but because these planets are so close together and their Roche limit is so tight, they're kind of tearing each other apart, but they just dump the material back onto the other. And this is an area called the Belt, and it is the most dangerous area in probably all of the Miss Mother's space, just from a sheer environmental point of view. The Miss Mother, the Roche limit, the Belt, sorry, has mass constantly moving back and forth, and this could be the size of boulders, giant pieces of stone to rains of pebbles and rocks, but it's always moving back and forth. There are two planets that make up the Dark Twins, like I said. Um, there is one that's called Belas and one that's called Zianth. Um, they're, of course, they're alike in size because they had to be, otherwise one would fall into the other. But they are very different in their makeup. Um, sorry, I called the Grand Girdle. Oh, the link. Um, Twins are identical in almost every way in mass and everything like that. But whereas Balas is miasma of badlands, deserts, scrub around the grinding girdle, it is got you get to more fertile ground around the grinding girdle because it's always being ground's always being churned, which aerates it, which means that it's one of the strongest growing areas. So there's this huge belt around the girdle that with that size landing zone where there is dense jungles and just very fertile ground. So it's like the best place to grow things, but it's also one of the most dangerous places. And so yeah, and the jungles grow are so aggressive that the land itself being torn apart cannot slow them down. They grow just as fast as the land gets torn apart. Um, and it does have a lot of freshwater lakes, as I'm. And then Zianth is pretty much almost the same. The girdle on Zianth hits in an ocean. Um, it's not. It's surrounded by a sea, so the sea itself is incredibly violent, turbulent, lost, because currents in the sea are not caused by moons, because there are no moons. The currents in the sea are caused by the pulls of the other planets and by the turbulent nature of all this mass smashing into the water. So the seas themselves are freaking insanely deadly. They'll sail the seas? Yes, they do. Uh, the inhabitants of these two planets, they have come to see their lives as a test, and they enjoy trying to live the test. There are giant land masses like mountains and stuff like that on both planets. Giants actually live there, and then there are huge trees and forests on Nth. They're mainly conifer forests, basically trees that can grow fast enough to also keep up with the chaos of the land. Um, it's just, and there's also mangrove marshes along the south of the planet, Xanth, and there's a lot of lore for it. But I like the Dark Twins because they're mainly home to demi-humans and some humans. But there's a lot of goblins and orcs and everything like that there. But the goblins I went big on the goblins being tinkerers. And the goblins, they have this thing they like to do. The orcs have a tradition too regarding the girdle. An orc who wants to show how capable, not just physically, mentally, and everything like that, and wants to show how, basically to show why he should be leading. The orcs try to navigate the girdle barehanded. I mean, they can take anything that, like a rope, grapple is fine, climbing claws, pitons for your feet, all that's fine. But you can't take any type of magical devices, and you can't type any type of mechanical devices to aid you. Like you can't get a grapple gun, which exists. You can't get a grapple gun to fire a grapple hook farther out. It's only as far as you can throw it. And your whole purpose is to make it through the girdle. You don't necessarily, you really don't have to land because that's almost impossible. You die. But they had to move through the girdle between the worlds. And they do that with those meager tools. The goblins do something different. The goblins they don't see the girdle as a test of manhood or test of leadership or anything like that. The goblins see the girdle as a really insane race course. Goblins have races on these pretty much sleds that have just enough gems to give them force to move with and to steer with barely. And then the goblins have races going across the girdle, going from one side of the girdle to the other, and they bet on those. And anyone's more than willing to be allowed to race in them if they want to build a rig, and it just gives them more to bet on. But it's just adrenaline junkie nature stuff, and they absolutely are insane for it, and it really kind of it sets the stakes on the goblins for them just how willing they are to take risks to do something that they find creative. The next world is Iambar. Iambar has gone through really big changes recently. Iambar was another very diverse world with elves and that on it, all demi-human races. But in the past 300 years, something happened. Number one, something went out called the Call. And the call was from the elven elders, and they basically said they wanted all the elves to relocate to Iambar. And it wasn't even called Iambar originally. Had the original? No. But the elves are some of the strongest sorcerers in the world, and they have some of the longest historical records because they have people still alive, present when they were awoken. And so they basically have been building knowledge about their situation. They have come to realize, or they have seemed to have come to a determination that the elven people single-minded and united under on one planet. And to make that happen, they usurped the leadership of Akbar, and they've made it their homeworld. And they've been calling elves in. Elves can come there freely. They get set up in the society. They don't exactly have a large enough population to take the entire world, but in the last 10 years, they have been slowly driving all the other races further and further into one area on the world. It's not like they're putting them in the desert or anything. It's hospitable, and they have begun to refer to them as refugees, and they have been informing people that they need to find a way to and somewhere else because they are not going to be welcome on this planet anymore. When this started happening, Miss Mother, the Miss Mother, it is said that the Miss Mother stepped in, that she met with the elders, and after the meeting, Miss Mother didn't say anything about the elves, but she also did not authorize it. She did not make an admission that it was okay, and but it's still happening. That's a big there. There is another world called Cordanthan. Cordanthan is probably the smallest uh, world, but it also has second largest body of water. It's fresh water, but it's a very large body of water. And this is pretty much capital of Cordanthan is a place called Skysea. Um, Cordanthan is the shipyards of all the world. The people there make the best ships, and there is a large community. Okay, the gnomes design and build the best ships, but they're not necessarily best sailors. But there is a large of fans of Dragonborn there, and the Dragonborns love the sea, and they started out as sea captains and seafarers and fisherfolk. And when the gnomes started building sky ships, they just leaped at the opportunity to crew them. And so the gnomes build sky ships, and they're almost always crewed by Dragonborn. And it is just a wonderful symbiotic relationship between those two. And the gnomes have Cornthon has the second largest navy, not because they wanted to build a navy, but because they saw what was happening with Elatris, and they reacted to it by starting to build their own navy. Their ships are better. Their gems are higher quality. Their overall technology and magic tech is better. But they just started building this fleet, and Kyrell has had years to build theirs. So they're working at a great disadvantage. Plus, their ramping up and building of their ships has made tensions between they and Kyrell pretty much terrifying. And everyone is just holding their breath to see what happened. And then, not Kyrell, sorry, Elatris. But then there's one last world, and that's the world of Kyrell, the one that I was talking about, where the world flew out of its normal state of orbit. Kyrell was blasted from its place in orbit and put out on the very edge habitable space around the brown dwarf. And because of that, that space is very much dangerous to them in a lot of ways. A lot of the debris that was not used in the worlds is out on this belt on the edge of space. And because they're basically kind of in the belt, they have a lot of problems with impacts. Also, when the other story is that when they were blown out of their orbital position, it's because the Mist Mother literally slapped them. And this violent action caused an equatorial ring of volcanoes to erupt out. Now, this ended up saving a lot of people because when it flew out to the edge of the habitable zone, most of the world froze over. The only place that was not frozen was this volcanic rift along the equator. And that's because there is literal just fields of magma that keep the ice back. When this happened, about almost 3/4 of the population died. Anyone on the surface couldn't get make some kind of shelter. They froze to death. A lot of the communities that lived in underground situations, they were better off, but they were cut off from food. Except for what they could produce underground, they had nothing. This incident happened around 100 years ago. But this incident happened, and when it happened, Kyrell was in no way, shape, or form and ready for it. And it kind of threw the world into disarray, of course. And the people who could, this happened about 100 years ago, the people who could made their way to tutorial zones. The actual way they did this and the way they've been doing this is they tunneled. They there was already a large. The other thing about Kyrell is there was already a large. There was an Underdark. Kyrell is technically hollow, so there is an Underdark. The only thing that's and the Underdark is a large network of caves, tunnels, etc., etc. But there's also other things in the Underdark, environments in the Underdark that are not natural. Like there is lost worlds in the Underdark. Um, Now because of this, it's a little bit easier to sustain things, but because they can grow more in the Underdark than they really could in any other Underdark, and to actually keep people help them survive. But they're what they have to eat is very limited, both in quantity and in variety. And so one of the things that happened is Kyrell and not Kyrell, but sorry, my cat's biting me. Uh, Alatras began sending aid to Kyrell, and this came in the form of uh, just materials to build with, came in the form of food supplies. But one of the other things that happened when Kyrell when the incident happened is that the atmosphere around Kyrell is incredibly unstable, and it is pretty much cyclonic at all times. This is basically means that bringing an airship in is nearly impossible. Kyrell was literally trying to do airdrops, get supplies in the beginning. Um, some of the best pilots or navigators are the ones who can navigate through the upper maelstrom of Kyrell's atmosphere and come into and manage to land a ship on the planet. There are several small cities along the equatorial belt, but there's also one large city that is pretty much inhabited by dwarven clans, humans, and everyone who could make it there has made it because it's also the only place that there is a skyport. And what that means is that's the only place that you can trade get items to come off the ships. Um, Alatras has placed a garrison of their own troops on Kyrell. Uh, in that city. That city is ruled by a dwarven lord. It was originally a mine, and there is the basic thought was that the garrison was put there. Not thought. The concept was the garrison was put there to help with repairs, to help with getting supplies, handling any problems that might have occurred due to the lack of supplies, and pretty much being a core of engineers to help with everything that needed done. Naturally, this was not supposed to be. They were Latras asked for something in return for their aid. The biggest thing they asked for is Kyrell is the second largest of quality gemstone, and even though this happened, they're still mining and they're still trading because that's the only way they can get supplies. So their Elatris is now commanding the majority of their exports of gemstone and raw materials because it's kind of a tit for tat trade value of that. And they basically have that set up as part of. I don't want to say it's a negotiation because they originally just started bringing aid, but it's kind of like a tribute that they give to the kingdom of Elatris in for their aid there, and pretty much that's the way it stands right now. Um, what we did in the campaign I ran is uh, we explored a lot of the back history around the entire concept of uh, the concept of the breaking of Kyrell. Um, through the storyline, we kind of broke down some things and found out some things about how that happened and why. It was it was a level 1 to 20. It still hasn't completed yet. They are 20th level. Um, basic gist of the campaign was that initial act of tearing a hole in the Mist Mother gave access to some of the other planes to directly to the Mist Mother's body, or the dust cloud. The reason for this is Mist Mother let a trickle of power every single one of the planes come through, so that creatures that were from that plane that she had brought over were able to continue to exist, because there were Fey creatures there that needed the Fey planes. There were elementals that needed energy from the elemental plane to survive. Everything that needed representation from the planes had that trickle of energy to survive. But she did not give any plane existence direct access to, because other things could come through the planes as well and possibly gain access. The Mist Mother has closed herself off to everything extraplanar to her. Souls can be are let through one way direction. But the entire situation boils down to nothing can get in unless she lets it. Nothing can get out. She lets it. Body is sacrosanct. It cannot be violated just because she has that much power in her own. And like I said, the gods originally were going to try and force her, but as they analyze the situation, some of the less aggressive gods realized that if they exerted enough force to make the Mist Mother release their people and give them up, basically tear her open to get their people out, that it would also basically, for the most part, destroy everything inside the Mist Mother, because it would cause her to release all that energy that she has stored up in there to keep everything she wants it, and it would be catastrophic. So they pretty much worked this deal where the Mist Mother would let prayers go through, let souls go to proper places. She'd let people worship what they want to worship, and the power of prayer would go, and they would get their worship from their different followers. And there's churches set up all the planets. So all this basically boils down to the concept that the Mist Mother is very much in control of her environment. It is absolute. When this accident happened, there was that tear. That tear was not able to be completely manipulated, but it increased the access from several different planes of existence, and those planes of existence began to influence some of their followers, and they pretty much had set up a ritual to continue to widen this opening, this rift, and allow more of their energies to come through. And what it eventually led up to was there was a huge attack. A literal army came into existence on Elatris, and that army attacked Elatris and basically put Elatris on their ass. Destroyed a lot of their existing infrastructure, navy, and everything like that. Almost destroyed the entire council, and put the nation into chaos, because Elatris was the most organized planet. Elatris is also the source of all the conventional rifts that are there. The rifts, however, allow things to pass back and forth very, they are maintained by expulsion of an insane amount of energy that is fortified in ways via the Mist Mother herself. When they ripped this asunder and blew this entire thing open, it actually sundered the Mist Mother herself. It divided her into separate parts. Mist Mother was still there, but being only 1/3 of herself, she had to use all of her energy to keep the rift widening any farther. So the rift is limited to Elatris, and it's limited to that plane of existence, that planetoid, and that's where everything has to come through. So Elatris became ground zero for this fight. Heroes were the ones who thwarted an initial ritual in Elatris that was supposed to let this happen sooner, when they were still lower level. And they fought and stopped the ritual. As they were continuing to move through the storyline and they were continuing to figure out what was going on, what was influencing these changes, what was causing all this upheaval, and they learned that it was Feywilds, the Nine Hells, Shadow, the Negative Plane, and and the Elemental Plane. And specifically from the Elemental Planes, it was the Princes of Elemental Evil influence. So, and it was the four planes. So as they went through and they began trying to figure out how to fix this, it got to the point where they ended up actually negotiating treaty with two of the sources of issue. They negotiated a treaty with the Feywild. Feywild was allowing other sources to move through the Feywild in order to get to this plane of existence. The Feywild was the initial source of the rift because the Feywild had the most amount of direct contact and allowed energy to pass back and out of all the different realms because it was considered the most basically benign. But so the Feywild, the troops were coming through the Feywild, going through the rift in the Feywild, and coming out here. The other problem was because there was an open gap between these realms of existence. The Feywild, anything that was, anything that's from another plane and is killed here goes back to its plane of existence. Well, all it had to do was turn around and make the trip back through the Feywild. All right, let's see if that worked. I don't know why this headphone just shut off. I do not know. I'm sorry. I apologize. Let me get the audio back going again. What type of... Oh, I know. I know. If Godzilla made music. Hmm? Where I put in the information then? House. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Coming through. There we go. Okay. Ooh, that was weird. I apologize for the delay. Let me fix everything so you can see me again. People here, I'm amazed. But yeah, so the basic gist comes down to Feywild was their plane to enter into from, and the Feywild was probably the most reluctant plane area that wanted to happen. They went along with it because otherwise they would have had to literally fight a war on their own hometown from invading to get access, and because they were promised loot, they were promised to gain something for this. But since they were the most reluctant, they were the first ones to come to the negotiating table. The key to all this was, what was the driving force that started this whole invasion? That turned out to be, it wasn't the Nine Hells, sorry, it was the Abyss. And that turned out to be something very, very specific. Orcus. If you don't know who Orcus is, I would suggest Googling him. He is probably one of the bestest demons that they've ever made. And he is, I do believe, Babylonian demon. Like he's represented in our actual lore. But Orcus has always wanted to bring death to the real world. And by that means, I meant he wants everything to be dead. He is both a demon and he's undead. And he basically, he can move freely through the negative plane, which is death, and he can move through the abyss. And he basically began to negotiate and engineer everything for this takeover of the Mist Mother. And the reason for this is he wanted to turn the Mist Mother, what would be her corpse, into an undead ship that would allow him to go through, and he was going to move her, well, it would allow him to go and utilize her to move through areas and engulf them in this new undead realm he had created, and pretty much destroy whole worlds, and thereby increasing his own minions, etc., etc. So when they found out it was Orcus, my players got excited because they wanted to fight Orcus. So they basically did, usual, not usual, sorry. They basically, when they found out who it was, they began making plans. They ended up on Kyrell, because that's where they were drawn to for the actual final confrontations. And that's where they sit. They now know it's Orcus, and they are they're bracing themselves. They're actually getting ready to sit down, because Orcus represents the last two factions. The other two factions, the Elemental Planes and the Feywild, have all agreed to terms. The only two that haven't are the Abyss and the Negative Plane. And so, pretty much, Orcus is coming to the table, literally, and they're going to sit down and they're going to negotiate. It's happening in their world reference time in 2 days. And that's where we left the campaign off. We had to stop, and we're going to do some pre-recorded games, and we're going to wrap it up. And what happens to them and their actions are going to determine how this entire setting moves forward. So I'm really excited to see what happens and just experience it. And so I'm going to be doing more writing on this. I've got to catch up everything. One of our players, Alagros, is an amazing moat. So I'm going to get their moats. I'm going to start coordinating this, and the players want to help. They want to help break this out and organize it. So I'm using all these little blurbs that I have here that I've created for Kyrell, Cordanthan, Ambar, Dark Twins, Alatras. I'm using those as our launching points, and we're going to be updating what they've experienced and they've gone through into each one of the worlds to get it updated. We have created a lot of NPCs. We have created a lot of the world in general, and of the worlds in general. And we've got some things we've added in. And so I just really want to build this out from here. I know with the campaign, effects the campaign had in the world, that we have more than enough to finish out the initial source book setting. So that's what we're going to be working on. And if we can get enough work into it, I want to start thinking about trying to publish it within about 2 years, depending on how fast the writing. But I think once we get back to playing and we wrap it up, and then we have more adventures in Kingdoms of Mist, that we will be able to really have this work kick off. That's what I want to say. It's all about the story, and we have told an amazing story so far, and I don't know where it's going to go from here. But what I can tell you is that it is with as epic as the story has been, my players and how they have things, I can honestly say that I don't know how this not continue come or to grow. It has. It's been amazing. I've loved it, and I hope you loved it. And I can't wait to finish this part of the story. I hope you come and enjoy it. I know it's a lot to get through. It's played every about 4 content, but it's all on our YouTube. Check that out, and if you don't, that's fine. But please try and tune in to the finales. Might be play a lot of stuff, but because my players are amazing. Together is awesome. So here, if you podcast of this long rambling that you can, it's on our YouTube. If you wasn't any, greatly appreciate it. We have lots of ways to support it. You can please like and follow us on. Subscribe to us. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Twitch, especially streamers. And if you want to be able to, kind of be clued in on what's happening next, you really want to be a part of the Twitch stream, and go to our Discord and join our Discord. I'm going to try and make Discord much more active, and I'm trying to get help doing that. So go to our Discord and just be present. We want to have you present. We enjoy this content with you, and we will be doing more campaigns, and we're going to players. Do not be afraid to reach out. In the meantime, I've rambled on way too, and I think you guys deserve to be able to get back to whatever you. So I'm gonna say thank you so much for on different game. Appreciate any support you give. We appreciate all the views we can get. So let other people know you can. And we always say, you know, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, social distance when you can, wear a mask when you can. We all know what's out there now. Always know, we've known for a long time now, and we still have to be careful, take care of each other, and just remember, table and
alone, no need for a crew. I've got my flaws and bonds and wish you well on your way. Wait, could I extend a quest full of mayhem? There is something dangerous in the plan. This game warms my heart, proved in the fire as our walls break down. And the years of brawls, every level better as we raise the bar. And I'm on job. Magic items in every shop. So let me win you over. Grab some dice, become a hoarder. Gather paper and a sword. Join with our crew, kill beholders. From the tavern on the corner to a battle with a gnoll. Great adventures fighting ogres. Please don't let the game be over.
Just a question, you know I'm hooked. If we forget, we'll check the handbook and it's okay. Stay. It might take hours to kill this dragon, but don't you wanna be the champions when we play? This game, it warms my heart. Choose who we are and then we play the part. And let's dungeon crawl. Now I'm looking deadly with a +1 roll. And I'm on the job. Magic items in every shop.
So let me win you over. Grab some dice, become a hoarder. Gather paper and a sword. Join with our crew, kill beholders. From the tavern on the corner to a battle with a gnoll. Great adventures fighting ogres.